All I can honestly say is, wow. We quite literally just got some of the biggest changes we have seen yet in Diablo 2 Resurrected, with the final 2.6 patch notes released today ahead of Season 3. So strap in, boys and girls. We're about to dive headfirst into many of the significant changes, and one of the biggest ones yet. Spoiler alert, Terrorized zones and Sunders are coming to single player. While there is a ton to unpack here with the unveiling of the final patch notes for 2.6 ahead of Season 3, I'm going to take you through as fast and efficiently as possible, with the first major call out again being that we have Season 3 launching February 16th, and as we have seen in the past, it will be 5 p.m. Pacific stateside, and sorry for you EU players, we know that 2 in the morning is certainly early, but I know that many of you are going to be up early in the morning grinding through Friday and into the weekend. When 2.6 dropped and we had PTR, we were officially introduced to 8 new rune words, and while they weren't the sexiest and exciting of additions, Pez did imply last week that ahead of these final patch notes, there were going to be some spicy and juicy adjustments, and oh boy, in my opinion, did Blizzard deliver. Let's first dive right in and start with the 2.6 helmets. Bulwark, Ground, and Temper were not adjusted, as Blizzard felt like these had already strong balance. I would generally tend to agree here, as we know Bulwark is already a strong B tier mid-game adjustment, only requiring the IO rune. Whether you want to rock this on a melee character, on the mercenary, it already was pretty strong. And then as we think about Ground on the lightning resistant absorb, in addition to the Temper with fire, I do agree those were already fairly moderate at C tiers. Maybe they could have gotten some upgrade, but the one specifically that I actually had as a D tier initial item in PTR now got a massive change. Let me tell you why. So as we look at level 1 cleansing aura, if I think about an energy shield sorceress for a second, as we know, poison damage immediately penetrates through the energy shield. So when I think about now the ability to put cure on an Act 2 mercenary in combination with insight giving meditation and a prayer merc, you already have a passive benefit between meditation and prayer, which kicks back replenish life to you as the character, or in this case the Sorc. And now if you add in a tri-stack aura of cleansing, reducing poison damage, that is massive for the sorceress here. So I am thinking here and predicting that you're going to see some energy shield Sorcs definitely taking advantage of that Act 2 merc setup. Of course, even if you want to rock cure as power farming in Dariel, it does give you some benefits. I would say the most disappointing change here for the helmets was Hearth. I mean, it's nice they added cannot be frozen, because again, in Act 5, where you're probably going to rock this helmet, there's a lot of cold damage and you tend to get frozen. So sure, it was a nice little quality balance change, but it certainly didn't break the bank on Hearth. Hustle was one of the more interesting rune words in PTR, because you were able to make this in both an armor and a weapon. Now, some people were upset with the weapon because you were essentially just using it as a pre-buff to proc burst of speed, but they have some fairly significant additions and changes that definitely up-level these tiers for both the armor and the weapon. So as we start with the armor, there were 2 significant topical changes here, both on faster run walk and increased attack speed. So increasing faster run walk up to 65% and increased attack speed to 40%. These are huge, especially for a Bozan or any other character. But the biggest thing to call out here is the +6 to evade. What we don't yet know reading this is this gated to Amazons only, or is this a generic addition to anybody wearing this? The reason this question becomes important is that at +6 level fade, you get 40% chance to evade, and that is hugely significant if you're a non-Amazon character. Essentially what this means is if it's a generic plus skill, that means any all plus skill gear that you're wearing will up level this +6 even higher, so you can take advantage of different breakpoints. So I believe this is generic. We'll have to see when it launches, but wow, that is a massive, massive change for the armor. And this definitely gave this a boost. And I will absolutely expect to see this across different melee characters, but probably used on the Bozan. Now, the weapon changes here are fascinating, because effectively what they did is they wanted to make this not just a pre-buff. So what you'll notice is they reduced burst of speed as a pre-buff from 9 down to 1, but in an exchange for that, they've added level 1 fanaticism. Now, if we think about burst of speed, so when we're up here, obviously at level 9, you can see we have 44% increased attack speed and 51% faster run walk. So as we go down to level 1, there definitely are some fairly significant reductions. But again, if we look over at level 1 fanaticism, you do have the 14% increased attack speed, and of course you get the damage and the attack boost. So it is an interesting trade-off. And then you'll see from a min-maxing perspective, they did increase the overall range for the enhanced damage. So I do think, for example, again, this can be made in any weapon, but if you're a boson and you are combining this with the armor, I think it is extremely powerful. And we're going to touch on strafe down in the changes because there was a significant update they made. But the other thing here, as you think about the level 1 fanaticism, is if you're a necromancer and you're having skellies and revives, this only costs a co-rune now to get level 1 fanaticism. And again, you can make this in anything. So you could put this on a rogue act 1, you could put this on an act 2, for example. So this isn't necessarily just used for melee characters, but you are probably going to see some necromancers take full advantage of the new hustle upgrade. When many people tested Mosaic and PTR, they felt that 25% consume charges was not sufficient, as most people were not going to dual combine these different claws, as there are alternative slot options. So many people wanted to see 35%, but boy did Blizzard deliver here by going not only from 25% to 35, but all the way up to 50%. Now, not only did they actually do this, but you can see here when a finisher is executed this way, it now refreshes the expiration timer of the stack, which means that when proccing this new non-consume stat, it resets your timer expiration. This massively elevates this claw into the A tier, in my honest opinion, and I think you're going to definitely see people take advantage of the dual Mosaic to get that 100% non-consume. Now, when we look across the rest of the claw, they added some nice lifesteal, obviously some elemental damage, so it definitely got some nice boosts, and I think overall the martial arts assassins are going to be very pleased with this. But real quick though, there's definitely something weird and funny here that the devs did, as you'll see here that they actually struck out adds 3 to 14 cold damage, but the irony here is that the cold damage actually comes from the Thol rune, which grants that exact damage. Now, I don't know if this was a typo or just a mistake, but it was kind of funny to see regardless. As many called out in PTR, including in the video that I made on Metamorphosis, there were some interesting things that we experienced in PTR, and it was really having to do with the restrict state specifically, whereby when you were in the mark buff and going back from wear into human form, you were ultimately restricted from doing things like recasting battle orders or tap or teleportation. And based on these changes and the updates that we can see here down below called out for Metamorphosis, we are not seeing any specific explicit call out that they have altered the restrict state. We are also not seeing anything called out about this being restricted to pelts only. As you can see, this is still generically added for helms. But I think this specific statement right here is really what is important here, which is they wanted to make this the best in class slot for shape shifter druids. So there were a lot of questions in PTR if this was going to be leveraged on barbarians or sins or paladins, for example, or of course a bear sorceress. But with the current restrict states, if they're not changing those, you would only be able to attack in the normal attack mode. You're probably not going to do that on a barbarian or a paladin. So as of right now, really no significant changes to Metamorphosis. It looks like it certainly is intended as we maybe thought it was for proper implementation to Druid only. And as we know, we'll have to wait for Season 3. There are no alterations to the restrict state. Offline players, you can finally rejoice. It is official that Terrorized Zones and Sunder Charms are coming to offline gameplay experience. This is something many of us predicted because all of the information is in the local client-side data, so they pretty much had everything that they needed to implement it. The really outstanding one piece here was how are they going to operate the randomized rotation of Terrorized Zones? As they somewhat call out here, right? Obviously, from an online perspective, it is somewhat automated and there is somewhat of a counter, but they are going to implement this a little bit differently offline. We don't quite know how they're going to do it yet, but this is an amazing experience for those Grailers out there or those that just wanted the kind of isolated gameplay experience. Now, the other thing that they've effectively done here with Terrorized Zones as well that implements both offline and online is a lot of times there were adjacent zones to Terrorized that then weren't subsequently terrorized. So if we think about Darkwood being terrorized, Underground Passage was not. So now in red, they are going to simultaneously terrorize both, same with Black Marsh in the Hole and Jail in the Barracks. As we get into Act 2 and Act 3, they added Ancient Tunnels. This is awesome. I love power farming Ancient Tunnels. It's a very popular legacy 85 zone, and now you get the benefit of upscaling of all the terrorized desecrated groupings for those monsters there, so that's huge. I could see some people upset about Act 3. In Great Marsh, you have Gloam, so you obviously have to be extremely careful there. It's going to be a little bit of a dangerous zone, especially for hardcore players. Sewers kind of were already dangerous for hardcore players, but I do think that many people loved doing terrorized Kuras sewers just based off some anecdotal feedback from Discords and talking to others. So they have somewhat swapped these in. I guess we'll have to see feedback from the rest of the group. But as we get into Act 5 again here, they just did some additive adjacent changes with Frigid, Drifter, and Pit, and so on. So overall, we got some nice additions, but at least we'll have more simultaneous terrorized zones. And again, for those in single player, strap in, stay frosty, Sunders are coming to you. Many of you great detectives in Sanctuary called out some significant bug changes that you were hoping to see fixed in 2.6, and they certainly did deliver. Where at the same token, they have now made some, in my opinion, major balancing changes for a handful of a few of the character types. So let's dive right in. The first of which is Flickering Flame and the Resist Fire aura. Macro, Bioboy, and others have documented this, where effectively this was overriding any of the Paladin hard points that you put into that skill, which was effectively nerfing your overall damage output, especially for you Dragon and Holy Fire Dins. So we can certainly rejoice they have officially called this out and they intend to fix it. For you trappers out there, this is the most significant change that we have seen in a long time, and you can now effectively leverage the negative lightning reduction to enemy resistance. As most of you trappers know, you were never able to rock a Griffin on a trapper because effectively the whole point of Griffin didn't apply. You got the skill, you got the fast cast rate, but obviously you wanted the minus lightning reduction. We now can rock a Griffins. This is a huge significant improvement for trappers who can upgrade from the Shaco or other alternatives. So I think we are going to possibly see some more trappers come back into the fold with the ability to use this type of function. Now, as we get into the Amazon, a lot of people had called out the strafe bug issue, and you can see on the first bullet here that they are officially patching this, where strafe was not applying the attack rate bonus, and we are good to go there. Now, inversely, there was an issue where strafe was still doing 75% weapon damage after previous balance changes. So there are some things across the board, but overall, I think we are seeing some positive changes here for the Amazon, especially for those strafe bosons. Now, many people wanted to see the Cold Sorceress balanced after the introduction of the Cold Rupture, sundering immunities, mainly because of the native endemic skill of Cold Mastery, and Sanctuary, you finally got what you wanted. Unfortunately, the Sorceress, which was elevated back to the 1.09 meta, is now getting a little bit of a penalty effectiveness. So essentially, the way that this is reading right now is that Cold Mastery will now have a 1/5 effectiveness penalty after the immunity is broken. So if we think about this for a second, if and when you finally slot in a Cold Rupture and the immunity is being sundered, that means if you had, for example, minus 100% on your Cold Mastery, that is going to be penalized and reduced to only 1/5 effectiveness. Obviously, it's still great that the Cold Sorc has this native skill. You can still use it, but you are finally seeing some balancing, like how they did with the 1/5 effectiveness balancing with Conviction relating to Sunders. So definitely a fairly significant nerf on the Cold Mastery if you're going to rock a Cold Rupture, but it was worth calling out. Now, the final one to really focus on here for the characters were the Druid Shockwave Exponential bug. Again, Macro, Bioboy, and others have well documented this, that there was a significant amount of unintended damage that was coming from this skill. And so naturally, this was never intentional, as they've called out. And so now they are effectively normalizing this back. So the Druid Shockwave skill is coming back down to earth. As some of you know, and I have well documented in my Andariel quest bug video, there were instances where certain quest loot was overriding or not enabling you to upgrade into the new Terrorized Desecrated Treasure class implementations. There are a few interesting points here that I want to call out. So the first of which, they say that we have fixed Terrorized Treasure classes for certain super uniques and bosses. I think in some cases there were some upgrading issues, but this particular statement here is the important one that I want to call out, which is fixed an issue where an act boss's quest treasure class would sometimes be used instead of the Terrorized treasure class. As we think about it again, Andariel and the video that I well documented for you guys in the wild, that was the issue where the permanent quest loot was essentially overriding the treasure class upgrading in Desecrated if you quest bugged Andariel. The way that I read this right now, that doesn't explicitly call this out about Andariel and the quest bugging mechanism, is that might be fixed. So what I want you guys to do here is still ensure at this point in time that you are non-quest bugging Andariel, because based on the way that this is reading, it's possible that whether you quest bug or non-bug, it will now properly upgrade. But I would rather you guys do the non-quest loot by leaving the game, not talking to Ward, and ensuring that you still get the advantage of that, just in case this is not being worded and implemented in the way that we think that it is. Now, the really one only major call out that I wanted to finalize here in general is this. As some of you know, there was a significant memory issue having to do with the shared stash where a lot of people were logging in and quite literally seeing items poofed and gone. And so it took way too long, in my opinion, for Blizzard to fix this, but we can rejoice because it is finally here, where they now have fixed where the shared stash could exceed memory limit, which caused items in the player's inventory or stash to be deleted. So it looks like they have finally remedied this, so we should no longer be losing items that we have stashed over time. Well, there you have it, Sanctuary. I would love you to drop your comments down below so you and I can have an active discussion on your personal experience and feedback with these patch notes ahead of 2.6 and Season 3. Now, wrapping this up, what we really saw were some significant adjustments across the rune words where I believe these definitely upscaled their tiering from prior PTR. We saw some interesting quality of life and balancing changes across the characters and some much needed updates on the desecrated upgrading for Terrorized zones. But of course, the most exciting and massive significant change of this was Terrorized zones and Sunders officially coming to single player and offline gameplay.